Are you ready to take your message, your business, and your life to the next level?
Want to learn from someone with more than a decade of experience, training tens of thousands of people from all around the world?
Hi, Cliff. This is Pauline from Auckland, New Zealand.
John from Calgary, Alberta.
Amy Porterfield.
Michael Hyatt.
Dan here from Dunedin, New Zealand.
Ray Edwards.
Mark Mason. Mike Stelzner.
Pat from Smart Passive Income.
It's Darren from Melbourne, Australia.
Now is the time to live the life of your dreams and do the work you feel most called to do in the world.
Welcome to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show.
Here's your host, Cliff Ravenscraft.
Well, hello, my friend, and welcome back to another episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. I am so excited to be back in the studio. I want to say a special thank you to those of you who listened to episode 664 and tolerated the low audio quality of that show. I had no intention whatsoever recording an episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show while I was on my 10-day personal retreat in the Smokey Mountains. But I simply couldn't contain myself. And if you listen to that episode, I just want to say thank you for tolerating the audio quality. And I want to also say thank you to those of you who have already used my affiliate link with Kajabi to sign up for that special $99 for 3 months of Kajabi, which, by the way, if you want to just go and check that offer out right now, mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi is the link. I'll explain it again at the end, but this is only available through July 26th of 2021. And if you want to be able to get 3 full months of any of the plans that Kajabi has to offer, but 3 months for only $99 total, head over to mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi. Anyway, I am back from my 10-day personal retreat. I am loving the new pace that I've come back with, and I have come back with an insatiable desire to spend less time on social media, specifically TikTok. Not that there's anything wrong with TikTok. Don't get me wrong. The algorithm serves me some very powerful, wonderful new insight into several different interests that I have. But I did recognize that before I went on this trip, I was allowing a lot of my week being consumed by content consumption. So I was consuming content, and the whole point of this episode is to talk about the return, or my return, to content creation. Not that I will put an end to content consumption. I do enjoy consuming content, but more than anything, I want to shift my consumption of content to more carefully crafted pieces of content from other sources. Not just a random ongoing, the people who are feeding social media with something new every single day. They've got an editorial calendar where they've got all the topics that they plan on sharing over the next 7 days, a week, 24 hours a day, and all this other stuff just to keep top of mind. No, I want to invest more of my time, not all of it. I will still consume some of that stuff. Don't get me wrong. What I did, by the way, is I have my iPhone and I deleted all of the apps icons off of my main screen of my phone. And with the iOS 14, I think is what I have, they introduced the ability to delete the app icon off of your phone's home screen, but it stays in the app library. So now if I want to open up Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or TikTok, prior to doing what I did, I was able to just, I click the little button to open my phone, Face ID does it, and I had muscle memory. I wouldn't even have to look at the phone. My fingers would just do the walking. Anyway, my fingers would do the walking to the icon, and boom, before I know it, without even consciously being aware of it, I'm now on Instagram. I'm now watching TikTok. And I can tell you right now that I can get into a very unconscious pattern where I'm not consciously aware of the fact that I've just opened this up. I didn't actually intentionally go looking for it. It's just muscle memory. So what I did is I removed all of those off the home screen. Now they're available still in the app library on my phone. But now to open up any of those apps, I have to open my phone. I have to pull down, type into the search box at like IN for Instagram or TI, and then all of a sudden there's TikTok, and then I have to click it. Makes me much more consciously aware of the fact that I'm doing this. Hey, are you sure you want to go search for and open this app right now? And so what I want to do with my free time is, away from all of that consumption of content, I want to actually, if I'm going to consume content, I want to consume books primarily, and then a well thought out podcast. Not podcasters who just put out content because, well, they've got a schedule to meet, but people who've put out content that content is meaningful, well thought out, and valuable for me to hear. And I know which of those podcasters do that kind of content, and therefore I've always been subscribed to them. But also, I have come to have a passion, a healthy obsession even, with books, both the written word as far as reading it on a ebook display or an e-ink display or in the Kindle app or whatever the case may be, or a physical book. I've even had a little bit of a passion there. I've purchased, I think, 70 books in the last year. Physical books, my desks are stacked with them, and yes, I am reading all of them. I'm in various stages of a lot of different books. My kids are talking to me the other day. It's like, how on earth can you be in the middle of multiple books at the same time? And I'm like, well, let me ask you this: have you ever sat there and watched a television show that hasn't, that's still releasing content as it goes along, and then all of a sudden you decide on the weekend to go see a movie? And, have you ever sat down and had a different show you're watching with your friends or your family or whatever? And you know what? It is possible to pick up where you left off. It is kind of nice. And not to mention the fact that you don't always have to read something to completion. It is possible. And so anyway, I have a love affair with books, and it's even been amplified because of this 10-day personal retreat I took in the Smokey Mountains. I finished listening to all of Ready Player 2 in audio form. I actually love audiobooks as well, mostly fiction for audiobooks. I have a hard time listening to nonfiction in audiobooks due to the fact that I want to take so many notes. I want to highlight things, and you can't highlight things in audio form. But oftentimes I still will listen to a lot of audiobooks. Typically what I'll do with audiobooks is I will get the physical and or Kindle version of those books as well, listen to the audiobook while I'm reading if I'm in a place where that actually is something that is desirable. But anyway, I am replacing a lot of my content consumption from social media to well thought out content from a very small handful of podcast content creators, but a lot of great authors of books. All right. And if you want to hear more about the books that I'm reading and stuff like that, I'll occasionally be bringing some of that stuff here, but that's the kind of stuff I talk about in my Train with Cliff audio program every week. So trainwithcliff.com, a little bit more about that maybe later. So the reason why I want to consume a lot of meaningful content that's well thought out, because I want it to influence the way that I see the world. I want to become even more conscious of the beliefs that I decide to take in. I want to hear different perspectives that will challenge beliefs that I've just adopted, not so consciously in my life. And so I am expanding my world. I am expanding the way that I see things. And I have so many different passions, so many different topics, and that's the reason why I'm in the middle of so many different books. And one thing that I want to do with all of this expansion of my mindset and my beliefs and what I'm experiencing and how I'm seeing the world differently, I want to create more content. And this podcast is called The Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And so I could technically talk about anything and everything I'd ever want to talk about in this show, and I will. But here's what I know. I can get pretty deep into a topic. It's those of you who know me, who've been following me for a while, you know that I tend to go deep. When I'm into something, I'm all in. All right. And that's why many years ago, when I hired my first virtual assistant and I was doing this podcast, I talked about having my virtual assistant and the excitement and my passion for the learning how to delegate and the tools and the systems that I was using and the whole experience. But I want to go deep, and I was willing to create 38 weeks worth of content all about everything that I'm learning about virtual assistants. Now, here's what I can tell you. That wouldn't make for great content for 38 weeks straight of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. That would wear out a lot of people in this audience who have zero desire to hear anything about virtual assistants. You might tolerate me talking about it for 1, 2, or maybe even 3 weeks. But if I wanted to talk about it for 38 weeks, it's probably best that I go create that content in a separate show and maybe talk about it for 1 or 2 weeks here and promote that show. And that's exactly what I did back in 2012. Okay, so I want to get back to creating some more content. So first of all, I want to announce, wherever we're at, 3rd, 4th, 5th. 5th of all, I want to make an announcement to you. I have launched a brand new podcast. And that brand new podcast is called The Lord of the Rings Fan Podcast. That's right. I, Cliff Ravenscraft, have launched a brand new fan podcast, this time devoted to the world of Tolkien. And for those of you who have been subscribed to this podcast for many, 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 many years, you may realize, and by the way, for those that don't know this podcast, The Cliff Ravenscraft Show, for the first 300 or maybe even 400 episodes, it was the Podcast Answer Man podcast. This was the Podcast Answer Man podcast. But at one point, I transitioned the branding. I rebranded the show to The Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And the reason why is because I kind of got bored of talking about podcasting all the time after a decade. And I began talking about other things that were of interest to me. And I started having people giving 1-star ratings and reviews in the podcast directories saying, this is bait and switch. It's called Podcast Answer Man, but the guy just talks about the things he's interested in. Well, I changed it to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show and can't have that argument anymore. It's called the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And guess what? This guy, Cliff Ravenscraft, talks about the things that Cliff Ravenscraft is interested in. Thus, the solving of that problem. Anyway, back when this show was still called Podcast Answer Man, in fact, it was December 2012, I published episode number 288 of this show. We're now on episode 665. So it was a little ways back. Anyway, in 2012, almost a decade ago, that episode was titled My Secret Podcasting Project Revealed, and much more. By the way, if you wanted to, you could go find that currently, I think, at mindsetanswerman.com/288, although that link may at some point break. So I'm not sure how much longer mindsetanswerman.com/episode numbers will continue to work, but we'll see. I never say never. I might come up with a solution for solving how to get those all to forward over once I move this podcast over to Kajabi, which it has not been moved over yet because there are a couple of there's a lot of technical stuff that I need to work out in my mind how I want things to work. As far as importing the show into Kajabi, this show with 665 episodes now, it would probably take about 15 to 20 minutes to import all 665 episodes, and it'd probably take me about 30 minutes to go into all of the existing directories and switch things over and follow through and make all that sure that stuff happens. But there's a lot of SEO stuff that I take into consideration for this particular podcast. Not so much concerned about my other shows from gspn.tv or the Generally Speaking Production Network, but for this podcast, there are some considerations to be made, which means that this show may be the last show that gets converted from my archives over to Kajabi. Anyway, but I talked about the fact that in 2012, I was working on a secret podcasting project called The Lord of the Rings. And I said that, it's been in the works for a while. I recorded the first 2 episodes, but I chose not to release them at the time. And, well, that show never did get launched. I thought it would launch in 2012. But why didn't it? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. And it's a little bit of the story I want to share with you. Is back in 2012, that's the year that I began really shutting down the ongoing production of most of the shows that I had created for the Generally Speaking Production Network, which, by the way, you can now type in gspn.tv, and I found a way for it to allow me to still have access to the old WordPress website, but gspn.tv, the main URL, that's not .com, but gspn.tv, will take you to the new Kajabi site. But anyway, I ended in 2012 the following shows. Help I Got a Mac was a weekly show that I did with Chris Biding. Business Tech Weekly was a weekly show that I did with my friend Andy Traub. Social Media Serenity was a weekly show that I did with my friend Eric Fisher. Balanced Living Weekly was a weekly show that I did with my friend Father Roderick von Hogan. Successful Life Mindset was a weekly show that I did with my friend Tracy Trost. And I also had a faith-based podcast called The Almost Daily Devotional, which was almost daily. And in 2012, I shut down all of those shows and a handful of other ones that weren't necessarily weekly, but the production had come to an end. I was still producing content, by the way, even after shutting all those things down. So, for example, I was still producing this podcast, which was still Podcast Answer Man at the time. I was still producing Family from the Heart with my wife, which was still a weekly show. Pursuing a Balanced Life, which was my audio journal kind of format podcast where I talk about anything and everything. And that show, Pursuing a Balanced Life, eventually got rolled into this podcast, which I basically took Pursuing a Balanced Life and the Podcast Answer Man, and I combined those 2 shows, made them the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, but actually carried on the branding and the episode numbering from the Podcast Answer Man. So I took Pursuing a Balanced Life. It became unavailable to the public at that point. I just decided that, I wanted people to just follow the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Well, now the archives, I believe, of Pursuing a Balanced Life are actually, I'm pretty sure that those are now available. I've already transferred and migrated all of that over to gspn.tv. So if you go to gspn.tv and look on the homepage, you might be able to find Pursuing a Balanced Life there. And I also was continuing a faith-based show called Encouraging Others Through Christ, which was a show that I kind of just added episodes every now and then here and there. So I was still creating all of that content even after I shut down so many. And we were still, we might come back and add new content to the Twilight Saga podcast and the Hunger Games podcast and any other fan podcast that could just get new content whenever. But why? Why did I shut down so many shows? Why is it that I used to produce 7 to 15 podcast episodes a week, and then I'm down to really on a weekly basis only producing 3 podcast episodes a week? And that even slowly went down to just 1 podcast episode a week, which was the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Why did this happen? Well, it has a lot to do with the fact that over time, I had become more and more well-known in the podcasting space for my Podcast Answer Man brand, the consulting and coaching business that was continuing to grow exponentially year by year. I started all of this, GSPN.TV and Podcast Answer Man, in 2005, 2006, kind of as a hobby. Both GSPN.TV and Podcast Answer Man, the brand, the consulting side of my business, those things started consecutively at the same time as my full-time career in January 2008. And that first year was crazy. I was producing 7 to 15 podcast episodes a week, every single week. And I was also working on gaining clients for my podcast coaching and consulting. It was a tough year. I worked around the clock. And then in 2009, I continued on, had a little bit more balance. In 2010, I was really starting to wrap my mind around, it's like, wait a second, you know what? It seems like there's a lot of opportunity here for me to go and grow personally and professionally. Maybe I need a little bit more balance in my life. I want to focus a lot more on my health and fitness. And where the money's really starting to roll in is the profitability on this podcast coaching. And then finally, things in the podcast coaching and consulting, the Podcast Answer Man side of things, it started to take off in a big way financially. And when I say it grew exponentially, I mean, one year I doubled my income. And then that next year, that income that was doubled from the year before, that new income was doubled the next year. And it led to some pretty incredible things, which was great because for the first few years of me owning this business, I got to tell you, there was a lot of sacrifices that were made. A lot of things got put off. And so we were finally in this place where we're able to really breathe with a little bit more financial margin, if you will. And so, I took up a lot of that margin and did some things with our family and did some things for myself and began to invest. And I began to invest even greater into my personal and professional development. And I began applying that to things. And so one thing led to another. And eventually, I made this decision to kind of see where the 80-20 rule kind of is true in my life. And it's kind of like where 80% of my income was coming from 20% of the stuff that I was doing. And the 20% that was generating 80% of the income was podcast coaching and consulting. And the 80% of what I was doing that was only producing 20% of the income was content creation and this thing called Plus membership. And so I decided, you know what, I want to free up some margin. I'm going to shut down all of these shows. I shut down something called Plus membership, which was $10 a month at the time, and that was people paying to have every episode of all 7 to 15 podcast episodes a week. And that was good, but it was nowhere near to what I could earn if I just canceled. I don't know, if I freed up about 15, 20 hours a week of content creation and put that towards my podcast coaching and consulting work that I was doing, that would actually drastically even further increase my income. And so I began going down that route. The only thing is I built Podcast Answer Man, the business, the coaching and consulting side up to where it became pretty much what consumed all of my time, effort, and energy outside of my wife and my kids. And over time, it's crazy for me to think this, but it became a soul-sucking job. And I began to see it, just like my insurance career that I had left to go start all of this stuff. It was a distraction from my first love. And my first love is creating content that's entertaining, educational, encouraging, and inspirational. And also having a powerful and positive and profound impact in the lives of other people through conversations around shared passions. And eventually I learned that my superpower, if I could get into some coaching opportunities or teaching opportunities, wow. And beyond just the like, what cable do I need and how do I adjust my audio levels, and can you help me figure out why my RSS feed isn't pulling the latest episode? I wanted to have conversations with people about more meaningful things of life. So that's why all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, that I've kind of shut down all of this content over here on the GSPN side, and I've chased after all of this financial wealth over here on the podcast coaching and consulting side. And it's not all been for the money. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I helped over 40,000 people launch their podcast as the Podcast Answer Man. And so much of my engagement with those people was beyond the technical aspect of coaching and of the podcast consulting side. What cables do I need, and audio quality, and expanding your audience and all this other stuff. So I did get to invest heavily into people's lives and work with them on their mindset. It's just like, the only thing is I wanted to focus more and more on that stuff, but the technical questions just overwhelmed me all the time. It's just, there was so much. There's really not enough time for me to even have, it's like, let me just stick to the facts, get these answers. This is where my money's coming from, blah, blah, blah. And I began to dream. It's like, wonder what life would be like if I could really do what I most want to do in this world. And so that's what happened is that I'm like, I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen. So by 2016, in my own mind, I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do this thing called the Year of Identity. I'm going to change. I'm going to create the change in my life that I want. And that's when I began to dream daily of how I could be an encouragement in this world and get paid to do it. And from 2016 through 2017, I immersed myself into the study and strategy of whatever it would take, whatever plan I could create to make this transition in my life. And so much of what I learned came from the Tony Robbins materials and conferences that I attended, and so many other avenues. I mean, the number of books and studies that I did was just, it's pretty insane when I think back at it. But it was so incredibly rewarding, so that by September 2017, when I finally got around to reading The Big Leap, the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, something that my great friend Dan Miller, author of the book 48 Days to the Work You Love, he had been trying to convince me to check this book out for a long time. So finally, I got around to it on my reading list. And oh my gosh, I took The Big Leap right after that. It was just the perfect timing. And so I decided to build an entirely new brand and an entirely new set of streams of income. And for at least the period of time or a season to shut down all the Podcast Answer Man brand stuff and all those income streams that might lead to technical questions landing in my email inbox. And that's what I did. And so I went from Podcast Answer Man to Mindset Answer Man. I launched the Next Level Mastermind in November 2017, which is still going strong today. By the way, check out upgradeyourpeergroup.com to learn more about the Next Level Mastermind. I launched Next Level Workshops, where live events training people how to build an online business workshop. My wife and I did a Thriving Marriage workshop. These were in-person live events hosted here in our Next Level studio. That was all before COVID-19, by the way. But anyway, I launched a Day with Cliff program where you could actually spend one day with me for it's a reasonable fee, I think. But if you're interested in coming here to my home in Northern Kentucky, staying here for an entire day of one-on-one coaching, mentoring, and consulting, reach out to me. Just put Day with Cliff in the subject line. My email address, by the way, is cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. Stephanie and I launched the Free the Dream Conference, which we did for 2 years, and then COVID came along. Although, even if COVID didn't come along, we were going to take a year away from the full conference format, and we were going to do something a little bit more intimate and smaller scale. To regroup on some things and then come back with a conference. But that kind of just got put on pause during this whole COVID stuff. And that, by the way, Free the Dream Conference will come back at some point, and we're talking about some smaller scale stuff that had been tabled in the not too distant future. And then I began the Prosperous Coach method after reading the book The Prosperous Coach by Steve Chandler and Rich Litvin. And that radically transformed how I go about gaining clients, which is one of the reasons why I was not in the realm of content creation all the time. And so I'm like, listen, I want to immerse myself into this Prosperous Coach method. I want to see if I can actually generate a significant amount of income from my coaching and my mastermind groups without the aid and marketing efforts of traditional marketing, and especially even content marketing. And of course, to devote myself fully to that, I'm like, it's like I should really get in there and create an episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And I'm like, eventually, I'm like, no, I'm not going to create content for the sake of creating content. I will only create content when I feel inspired, and thus I've only done that. Now, all along the way, I have had an increased desire to come back to my content creation roots. And I'm not just talking about content creation for the sake of generating business, but I'm talking about creating content because I love to create content. So I back in 2018, November 2018, I think I launched the Train with Cliff audio program. It was originally called the Audio Journal, but it rebranded into the Train with Cliff audio program. There are now 261 episodes of that podcast, and I just started it in November 2018. And if you're interested, you can find out more at trainwithcliff.com. That show is currently on Patreon. It's currently $10 a month, but eventually that program is that podcast will get transferred over to my Kajabi site for cliffravenscraft.com, and it will be a paid premium member-only podcast, the Train with Cliff audio program. And it may be more than $10 a month. If it does become more than $10 a month, I'm going to offer a special lifetime price guarantee for those who are existing Train with Cliff subscribers on Patreon. They can move over with an offer to get in at $10 a month before I raise the rates. So if you've been thinking about joining the Train with Cliff audio program, now would be a good time. trainwithcliff.com. All right. Anyway, I also launched a new podcast, but this one was very much geared towards, marketing side of business things. But I still, even though I wasn't relying on it to get new clients, I just couldn't not talk about what I was talking about or what I was learning about the Prosperous Coach method after reading this book. So I launched a show called Cliff's Notes on Profitable Coaching. And there are currently 15 episodes of that podcast. And I do see some new episodes of that show coming in the not too distant future as well. Stephanie and I have recently relaunched the Family from the Heart podcast. We just published our 418th episode of that podcast. And there's no real business commercial effort or marketing behind it, although that show will be extremely valuable in gaining people's interest in, certainly Free the Dream Conference, maybe potential future thriving marriage workshops, and maybe even one-on-one coaching for me these days, because the type of coaching I do today is not podcast. It's not focused on podcasting. So therefore, that audience could be interested in some of my coaching. So who knows? It might be a valuable marketing tool as well. And then there were three other shows that I have launched in the last 2 years. I'm not going to mention those shows. They're no longer available online. I only launched between 1 to 3 episodes of those 3 different podcasts, and I've decided that none of those 3 shows are going to be content that I want to pursue moving forward. They were just little passion projects that started up, and they went just as fast as they came. And they're not good evergreen content that I felt that was worthy of staying in the internet archives. Anyway, but I will just say that I have had a very deep desire, a calling, if you will, to get back into content creation mode. I am a prolific content creator. I don't know. Maybe Leo Laporte is the only person I know that might be able to keep up with the level of content creation that I would do. There could be maybe 5 to 10 other people on this planet. Okay, Joe Rogan might be an example, but I think he's one podcast and it's 3 hours a day. He'd give me a run for my money. Maybe Adam Curry would give me a run for my money. Handful of people, like I said. But here's what I will tell you. Back when I was creating 7 to 15 podcast episodes a week, the only reason it was limited to about 5 to 7 podcasts and about 15 episodes a week, the limit wasn't the amount of time that I would be willing to invest in creating that content. The limit was, quite frankly, I'm maxing out my 2 full-blown Libsyn media hosting accounts. And not to mention the fact that it's a little tedious the way that I had things set up because I was doing so many different shows. So, but I had been dreaming of maybe finding a platform out there. Maybe I could find one platform that would have a reasonable monthly fee, to where it would give me the ability for me to launch multiple different shows, where each show would have its own beautiful podcasting page, its own podcasting player. I could easily forward like a domain to this one unique setup for just that show, where I could upload an unlimited number of episodes to that particular show and all of my other shows, but I could also launch a bunch of other shows. And I don't have to pay for separate accounts for separate shows. I don't have to have separate logins for separate shows. I don't have to have, separate media hosting accounts for different shows, all this other stuff. Each show would have its own RSS feed. It's not intermingled with others and all this other stuff. And I began to dream of this, but no such platform seemed to exist until, and that's why I couldn't wait to come to you guys in the episode before this one, in 664, where it's like, I got to tell you about Kajabi. And so now here I am. I have Kajabi. Kajabi has given me the ability to do all of those things. I personally have the ability with Kajabi to create, and this is key, an unlimited number of podcast shows, not podcast episodes, although I do have the ability to do an unlimited number of podcast episodes for shows. But I have the ability to do an unlimited number of podcast shows. And that's because in Kajabi, a podcast is considered a product. Now, when you sign up for a Kajabi account, if you sign up for the smallest account, you can have 3 products. And a product would be considered an online course or a podcast or whatever your product is. So you could have 1 product and 2 podcasts, or 2 products and 1 podcast. And you know what? Most people are only going to ever really launch 1 podcast anyway. I think if you go to the middle plan, I think you could have 10 products. So you could have 5 online courses and 5 different podcast shows. And by the way, with the first plan, you could have an online course, a public podcast open to everybody, and you could have 1 premium paid member only podcast. So that's even on the smallest plan. And then I think on the biggest plan that they have, I think you can have 100 products. So you could have 100 podcast shows. Now, I was a Kajabi user, like I said, shared in the previous episode. I was under their beta program, and I'm grandfathered in on a thing that gives me some extra special benefits. And one of those extra special benefits is unlimited products, which means for my Generally Speaking production network, which you can find over at gspn.tv, the URL, that there will be all of my Generally Speaking production network shows will be at gspn.tv. And there will probably be more than 100 podcasts there. I joked around in 2020 that in 2020 I was going to launch 20 new podcasts for 2020. That got cut off for COVID, and stuff like that. But then I forwarded it on. It's like, okay, well, we're in 2021. Maybe I'll launch 21 podcasts in 2021. But the problem that I ran into is just that the hassle of creating so many different media hosting accounts, and I even tried all of those podcasts that I recently launched. I launched a total of 4 shows on Anchor, but I had to have a separate account, a separate email, and a separate login for each one. It wasn't designed for that, and not to mention the fact that who knows what Spotify is going to do based upon their funding and all this other stuff and things like that. Their business model is it's questionable for me. So we'll see. Anyway, but now Kajabi, I can have the number of products that I have is the number of podcasts I can have. And by the way, if you sign up for Kajabi, you can actually, let's just say you sign up for the smallest Kajabi program, you have 3 products. You literally could have your online course, a paid member-only podcast, which is a private podcast feed only for people who pay for it, and you could have a public hosted podcast. You could have all 3 of those on your and your podcast show can have an unlimited number of podcast episodes. It's just that each MP3 file has to be less than 250 megabytes. That's the only limit. But you could upload 10 podcast episodes a day, every day, 365 days a year on your podcast. There's no limit on how much you can upload. There's no limit on the number of downloads for those podcasts, no matter if you get featured on Oprah or something like that. You're good to go. And and not to mention the fact that Kajabi allows me to have one login to Kajabi, and I could easily access all of my different shows. I can see all my stats right there instantly in the list of podcasts. I can dig into the stats to see more stuff. I can easily go into any show and add an episode without logging out and logging into another one. It's just so easy. And then, as I mentioned, I launched a brand new podcast this week, just on Saturday, July 17th. The Lord of the Rings fan podcast is now reality. It now exists. By the way, you can check it out. LordofTheRingsPodcast.com. LordofTheRingsPodcast.com. And that's what I'm talking about, where a single URL will take you straight to a Kajabi podcast page. And you'll see that you can browse the episodes of just that podcast by going to that URL. Now, if you go to gspn.tv, you'll be able to see that Lord of the Rings podcast is accessible via the overall network as well. It's pretty ingenious, and I love it. Anyway, so I launched the Lord of the Rings podcast, but get this. It took me 7 minutes to launch the show. That's it. Now, I want you to know I already had the artwork. That was created back in 2012. I already knew the name of the podcast. I knew exactly how I would want my description to show up in podcast directories. And I had already recorded the first episode and had the MP3 file ready to go. So as long as you have your artwork, the name of your show, the description of your show, and the first MP3 file, if you know what you're doing, like I do, it took 7 minutes. And that 7 minutes, I literally went from nothing, except for those 4 items, and then I log into Kajabi, I click New Podcast, I give it a name, I give it my author, here's my description, here's my artwork, and I hit Add New Podcast, boom, done. And then I say, okay, add an episode. Click the button, upload the MP3 file, gave it that episode a title, wrote in about 3 lines of show notes in the description, and I hit publish, gave it a publish date and time. Now it's accessible. And then I took the RSS feed and I submitted to Apple Podcast Directory, Google Podcast Directory, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. And 7 minutes after that progress began, I was done. That's it. It literally took me 7 minutes. Now, if you're not as well seasoned in creating content, creating podcasts and launching them, it might take you 15, 20 minutes, and it could take as long as 30 minutes to an hour, depending on if you know what you're doing. But if you know what you're doing, 7 minutes. And not only that, but I was so excited on Saturday, I actually recorded a second podcast episode for the Lord of the Rings podcast. And so it was like a 55-minute episode, and I converted it over to MP3. But once I had the MP3 file, it literally took me 60 to 90 seconds to upload it and publish it. That was it. I just logged into Kajabi, clicked on that podcast, add new podcast episode, gave it a title, couple lines of text of show notes, uploaded the file, hit publish, gave it a publish date and time. Boom, it was done. 60 to 90 seconds. So here's what I will tell you. Kajabi has given me exactly what I've wanted. There's no complexity, there's no extra cost, and there are no limits. I have 0 limits on number of podcasts. And so to think that I could literally have a harebrained idea to launch a brand new podcast that I didn't even think of 10 minutes ago, and within 7 minutes, I could publish that, boom. And if anytime I want to add a new episode to it, I could do so within 60 to 90 seconds after having recorded the episode and have the MP3 file, boom. There, look out, world. I am returning to my roots of podcast production. And 7 to 15 podcast episodes a week, we are not limited by mere limitations anymore. So let me just share with you what I've got going on. Currently, my active shows that are getting content as of right now. The Train with Cliff audio program. It is the most important show that I create, well beyond this show here. Many of the casual listeners to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show could not handle the level of depth of behind-the-scenes stuff that I desire to share. And so therefore I withhold a ton of stuff because, well, I just don't think the average listener is a big enough fan to want to hear what's going on behind the scenes. So the Train with Cliff audio program, that's a show that gets an episode probably on average at least one episode every single week. Sometimes I've been known to release 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 episodes in a single week. That's very few and far between, especially now that I have so many other shows that I'll be focused on. But at least one episode a week is approximately what you'll get. Certainly 3 to 4 a month minimum, but usually about 4 a month minimum. Let's see here. The next most important show is this one, the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And you might be thinking, well, gosh, Cliff, does this mean we're going back to a weekly schedule? The answer is, I don't believe in a weekly schedule. I believe in creating content only when I feel inspired to create content. Now, with that being said, I have a desire to show up here a whole lot more consistently than I have since I made the decision only to create content when I feel inspired to do so. But I will tell you this, will that be one episode a week? Time will tell. Just stay subscribed. I'll be here frequently and consistently. But if I'm ever like, you know what, it's been 10 days since I released an episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And if I sit in that moment that occurs to me and I say, oh my gosh, I really need to go record an episode of that show. That is not the right motivation for me to create an episode of the show. And therefore I will not do so. But if I come to that realization, it's been 10 days since I released an episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. If I realize that and say, you know what, and there's something in my heart that I really want to bring to that audience, well, then I will be here. And I have this sensation that with me creating so much other content, other places, that there will always be valuable stuff for me to come here and share overall that will be of interest. That's not all behind the scenes, although you'll get some of the behind the scenes, just not as much as the Train with Cliff audio program. So Train with Cliff audio program at trainwithcliff.com. Again, that show is still on Patreon. That will get moved over to Kajabi eventually. The Cliff Ravenscraft Show, still hosted on WordPress, and will eventually get moved over to Kajabi. However, the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, this show, will be the last show that I convert to Kajabi. And that just has a lot to do with a lot of potential SEO implications and processes and systems for transferring this show over. Cliff's notes on profitable coaching. I believe that's all. No, I think that actually might be pulled. You know what? it's currently on the cliffravenscraft.com Kajabi site. It's not accessible through any special URL, or you can't find it through the nav menu. I know where to find it. But eventually, I think as soon as I get ready to release and publish episode 16 of that podcast, I will make that to where it's easily found on my show, and I might even get a URL for that one. Family from the Heart. That one's fully on Kajabi. It's one of the 18 shows that I've already migrated over to Kajabi. So you can find my podcast that I do with my lovely wife. We just recorded, like I said, episode 418 titled Matthew is Going to College. And we talk a lot about our lives as a husband and wife and in our family and stuff like that. So that's over at familyfromtheheartpodcast.com. That show will, not weekly, but on average, when inspired, but frequent and consistent. Lord of the Rings fan podcast. I have no idea how frequent this show will be, but this is a show I could see going on for many, many years as I have the passion and time to devote to it. And so you can find that at lordoftheringspodcast.com. And Stephanie and I have launched the Twilight Saga podcast. And in fact, we're getting ready maybe later today to record episode 52 of the Twilight Saga podcast, where we're going to be covering Midnight Sun, which is the story of the book Twilight that's found in the book Twilight from Edward's perspective. And so episode 52 likely to be published by the end of today. And that can be found at twilightsagapodcast.com. And then when I say a return to content creation, let me just share with you some stuff that may come out. I'm not technically shooting for 21 shows in 2021, but I'm not discounting the fact that it's a very real possibility, especially if I consider a podcast to be a podcast with anything like 1, 2, 3, somewhere between 1 to 10 episodes. And if I do more, that's fine. But I could actually see myself doing some shows. And so this will give you an idea. I may have mentioned some of this in the previous episode. So if it's a duplicate of what I've already told you, I apologize. Although don't tune out because there is some new stuff here. So I am considering a completely revised version of the Virtual Assistant podcast. Currently, it has 38 episodes that were all recorded and published in 2012. That podcast today gets hundreds of new subscribers every single month, even in 2021. And about 300 people every month go and listen to all 38 episodes. Now, most of that content is evergreen. Not all of it, but most of it is evergreen. But what I have a desire to do is to go and go episode by episode and strip out the original sponsor of the podcast, and I am going to become the sponsor of the podcast. Actually, I should say the Next Level Mastermind is going to be the sponsor of the Virtual Assistant podcast, and I'm going to create a new intro, edit out anything that's not evergreen, and record a new outro or ending of each episode for each episode that will remain. And my guess is that it will go from 38 episodes down to maybe 15 or 20 episodes. Making it even more likely that those who discover the show will listen to all of them, because it's easier to commit to listening to all 15 episodes of a podcast related to something that you've been searching for, such as Virtual Assistant Podcast, and listen to all of them. I think people would be more likely to listen to all 15 than all 38, although plenty of people do listen to all 38. So that's one idea that I've got. I am considering the return of my faith-based podcast called Encouraging Others Through Christ. One of the ideas that occurred to me is that I have an entire series of faith journey updates that were a part of the Train with Cliff program, and I'm thinking about taking those episodes and making those episodes of Encouraging Others Through Christ, and then doing some faith-based updates of that podcast as I feel inspired. So that's a show that could come back with relative consistency as well. Then I am considering the launch of a brand new version of the podcast Answer Man. Yes, me, doing a brand new podcast, or it's going to have the Podcast Answer Man brand. It'll be the Podcast Answer Man Show. But it will be a different approach to it than what I had before, because I am no longer going to have a podcast coaching and consulting business that is the main focus of that. But I still have lots to share about the podcasting world, as you might imagine, and lots of value. And the sponsor of that podcast might be my Kajabi affiliate with Kajabi. So. It's very likely that by the end of this year, and maybe sooner than I imagined, that I will get around to launching the all-new Podcast Answer Man podcast. And then I am thinking about a podcast about mastermind groups. I was in the process of writing a book on mastermind groups, and that's still likely to occur within the next 2 years. However, one of the things that will greatly project that thing forward and make it come into reality even quicker would be if I took what I was outlining as chapters of my book and just recorded podcast episodes. And of course, the podcast about mastermind groups, guess what? That would be sponsored by the Next Level Mastermind. And then I'm thinking about a podcast all about Kajabi. I was thinking about calling it Kajabi Insights with Cliff Ravenscraft. And so it would be sponsored by my affiliate program or my affiliate relationship with Kajabi. And then along the lines of fan podcast, and I don't know how many people will even recognize these brands, but the Children of the Stones fan podcast. And if you know, you know. And if you don't know, maybe you'll learn when I actually get around to launching my very own Children of the Stones fan podcast. And the same thing for this next one, the Tomorrow People fan podcast. And again, if you know, you know. Both of those, by the way, are 1970s British sci-fi television shows. That's all I'm going to say about it, but I'm very likely, it's almost inevitable that the Children of the Stones fan podcast and the Tomorrow People fan podcast will be launched by the end of 2021. And then there's a podcast that I found in the archives of gspn.tv when I was migrating content over. And I had some very bad pictures in my mind of how I felt about those archived episodes. It's a show called The Community Voice, where I just did random interviews with, just did interviews with random members that I had grown a relationship with within my community of any of my podcasts. And I got to tell you, that's coming back. The Community Voice is coming back. You can see the archives from the old days over at gspn.tv. And let me just tell you, much, much more. That's for sure. I am back, my friends. Content creation. I am so thrilled that I've built my business in such a way that allows me to have so much margin to do what I feel most called to do, what I most love to do. And content creation is it for me. You know, I did a couple years of vlogging, lots of videoing and live streaming, and some of that stuff may come back. But you know, there's always been something about the voice and audio only content. And Clubhouse really got me back into the love of audio only content and got me out of that feeling like I need to go live on Facebook or YouTube and I need to create video content and all that other stuff. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I will still do those things. I'll still do live streams. I will still do video content. I'll get back into some vlogging in the future. But my heart has always been in audio-only podcast production content, and it is back. And it is back with a vengeance. Look out, world. Here I come. I am so excited. And I invite you to join me on any of these journeys that you desire to join me on. Whether it's the Train with Cliff audio program at trainwithcliff.com, or just staying subscribed only to this podcast is perfectly fine with me. Or if you want to see me get deep into the weeds of Tolkien over at lordoftheringspodcast.com, or you just want to hear me talk to random people within my community via the Community Voice. I don't have a URL just for that one yet, but it's over at gspn.tv. And yeah. And by the way, if it's currently, as I'm recording, and we'll publish this episode Monday, July 19th, Kajabi, if you have a desire to have one place that can handle your online courses that you want to sell, the ability to be your podcast media host and your podcast player on your website and all of that other stuff, and the RSS feed all taken care of for your podcast, the easiest, simplest podcasting solution I have ever seen, and I know a thing or two about podcast hosting services. All right, the easiest podcasting hosting service I've ever seen in my life is Kajabi. Mailing list for sending out email newsletters and all of that other stuff. And you can even do a paid podcast premium only. You can, in the future, in a couple of weeks or a couple months anyway, they're going to launch a paid newsletter. That's probably not my thing, but still is a possibility in the future. But it's your email list. It is your online courses. It's your podcast media hosting. It is your landing pages and sales pages, your pipeline marketing funnels, if you do that sort of thing. It's your offers for payment processing and monthly subscriptions and one-off payments. And I even used it for the Free the Dream ticketing platform. That took a little bit of, behind the scenes things for me to do that. But I everybody who purchased a Free the Dream 2019 ticket back in the last session that I did a Free the Dream conference, those tickets were purchased via Kajabi, an offer made on Kajabi. If you are looking to generate income, and I would highly recommend you try out Kajabi, and only until July 26th, 2021, can you get any one of the three tiers, the small, medium, or large tier. I don't know what they're called. But the small tier, you can have 3 products. The medium tier, you can have 10 products. And the large tier, you can have 100 products. You could have any of those tiers and play with it for a full 3 months for one payment of $99 if you use my affiliate link, mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi. Kajabi. Kajabi. All right, that's how you spell it. mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi. $99 for 3 full months until July 26th. Now, if you're listening to this after July 26, 2021, still go to mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi. More than likely, there'll be some kind of promotion there. It's usually you get 2 weeks free. For 14-day free trial you can sign up for. It's still definitely worth it. But man, if you're hearing this before the 26th, you got to go to mindsetanswerman.com/Kajabi and get it for $99 for 3 months. All right, that's it. I'm done. Until next time, my friends, I encourage everything you do, including pursuing those things that make you most come alive, to the next level.
Mindset Answer Man.